Well, I am really excited about today's guest on the Presbyterian and Reformed Churchman. To be honest, I wasn't sure he would agree to do the podcast. He is somewhat famous, and I'm having to resist doing this whole interview with using parliamentary procedure. But without further ado, I want to introduce to you Ruling Elder John Bise. You may remember him from last year's General Assembly. John was our moderator, and he did just an amazing job at keeping us organized through some very interesting debates. And so, John, thank you for agreeing to do this show.
George, thank you for having me. It's a delight to be with you, and I appreciate the Presbyterian and Reformed Churchman podcast and what I understand of your goals, getting folks better informed and more involved. That's what the Assembly is about, and so thank you for that.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Now, do I need to call you Mr. Moderator? Would you like me to call? Please, no. I was going to say, would you like me to call you Mr. Moderator? Because it's I'm having to resist all kinds of silliness. Okay.
I'm just a guy.
You're just yes. No, seriously, this is. I was honored when you agreed to do this. We've never met. I know a lot of my friends have very high respect or esteem for you. I thought you did a great job last year. I know there were some very difficult debates and the clickers and just some interesting parliamentary sort of maneuvers that needed to happen, and you navigated it all with grace. And so thank you for your service. Yes.
That's kind of you. You may not recall this, but I recall very well that the initial problem with the voting devices occurred during the election for moderator.
Yes.
And so we had several minutes. I'm sure it was not nearly as long as it seemed to me, but at any rate, it was a funny routine.
I know. Yes. And by the way, that was my first time ever stepping up to a mic at General Assembly, was to ask you, I don't expect you to remember this at all, to ask you to please give us more time to get our clicks in, because they weren't all going in. There's a lot of clicks that needed to happen.
So there you go.
and you did. So let's get to meet you a little bit before we get into sort of the polity and the parliamentary side of things. John, how long have you been in the PCA?
Well, I was born and baptized actually in a Presbyterian church in New Orleans in the old PCUS, and then was reared in First Church Jackson, which of course was one of the early churches, one of the founding churches of the PCA.
Yes.
So that was my childhood church, and was there, and then I live now in Huntsville, Alabama. Been here almost 30 years, and have been in two churches here. Had some time when I was away at school and lived in other places where there weren't PCA churches, but for the bulk of my life, I've been in the PCA.
Yes. Okay. And how long have you been a ruling elder?
Oh, goodness. I've been a ruling elder for about 35 years.
Okay.
20, a little more than 30, and 28 of that in the PCA. So.
Wow. Praise God. That is awesome. So basically, as soon as you became an adult, and your whole adult life was spent as a ruling elder.
That's kind of you. I'm older than you were alluding.
So tell what's the name of your church, but also tell us a little bit about your family and your career. Introduce us, get our listeners to know who John Bise is.
Yeah. So I'm a ruling elder at Cornerstone Presbyterian Church, a relatively new church here in Huntsville. Actually, this past weekend, we just celebrated our 10th anniversary of particularization.
Nice.
So that was a great occasion. And so my wife, Jane, and I have been there since the inception of the church, in fact, during its mission church days. I have two daughters, each of whom are married and have their own children and are active in their own churches. And actually, My grandchildren, one of my granddaughters, was recently received into communing membership at First Church Jackson, so that was a sweet occasion.
Yes.
To see a granddaughter, and I had forebears in that church as well, so that's sort of a nice routine. Career-wise, I spent most of my career, in fact all of it, doing business-related work, primarily in the areas of finance and valuation. The last 22 years I have been involved in consulting work that has principally consisted of business valuation work, some assistance with companies who are in distress or who may be in the course of buying or selling. And I laugh and tell people that typically my job is to try to be the calm person in the room when there's not always calm going on around me. And sometimes I, at least externally, can appear calm when maybe I'm not so calm underneath.
Wow, we could talk about that also as you were moderator last year, because you definitely did it calm and composed.
I'm glad it appeared that way.
Yes. I tell you, it's amazing to me. One of the greatest. I've only been doing this podcast for about 4 or 5 months, and the talent and the giftedness that the Lord has blessed His church with elders in His church is just amazing to me. And so I love hearing what you're doing or have done in the business world. And are you retired? Do you use that word?
Well, at the end of last year, I gave up my commercial office space. I don't know if it's apparent, but I'm in a home office now, and I'm transitioning. I've told people that I want to slow down a bit. I'm being a bit more selective about things that I do. Some sorts of cases I'm not accepting anymore, and I've told people that I'm going to be a little more relaxed with my schedule. So I'm continuing to work, and church work is also keeping me busy. So at any rate, but I'm hoping to enjoy a little more time with family and some travel and watching grandchildren's events and that kind of thing.
Yeah, definitely. Great. So I didn't know, obviously, that you were a part of a church plant or a mission church who has particularized. So were you, 10 years you said, were you long-standing in that area and you just believed in the mission in the area where the church was going in, or like how did that work out?
Well, I was in another church, and there were some events that occurred there that caused a group of folks to depart. It was one of those situations in which the Lord was at work, moving toward planting a church. It wasn't really apparent to us at the time, but out of a circumstance that was not altogether pleasant, the Lord brought good things, and so this little church emerged. And it's interesting, we began meeting in borrowed space, and we've had several locations, and in God's providence, just over a year ago we bought a property that had previously been occupied for some years by a Baptist church, and much to my delight and that of my wife, who had been praying as she walked past this structure, it's only about 3 blocks away from our home. So
wow.
That's been a kind providence of God.
Wonderful. Oh, wow. Okay, so does it have a baptismal? Have you guys had to do some construction there?
Well, there is a baptismal, but it is not readily apparent.
Okay.
And we're about to do some more construction to make space as the church is growing, and the baptismal presently is really out of view, but in the renovations it may go away altogether.
Yes. Okay. Well, so a friend of mine's church in Greensboro, an OPC church, just sold them their property, and I think they're going to absorb some of the members. But the funny thing was an OPC church with a faux wall blocking the baptismal from the previous Baptist church. And so,
in our case, the baptismal was recessed behind a wall, a pair of walls, if you will, at the rear behind the pulpit, and so it's not terribly apparent, but at any rate,
it's there.
it's there, and
Yeah.
those folks are God's people too. So,
Oh, of course. Okay,
we're
love it.
delighted. So,
Yes. I'm surprised the pastor hasn't tried to turn it into a hot tub for himself, though. Not yet.
I don't think that's going to happen.
Okay. Well, let's get to it. So, you were the moderator last year, and what I really wanted to do with this episode is kind of give people an inside look at how that works. And so, my first question is, and I assume the answer to this already, but I'd like for people to hear it. Like, did you know you would be nominated, and how does that work? And you don't have to say who nominated you, or you could, because I think that was kind of a cool story too.
Yeah, yes, I knew I was going to be nominated, and as you observed in our earlier communication, this was actually my third time to be nominated. Quite frankly, I had thought that after 2 times, perhaps I should sit down, keep my mouth shut, and let somebody else have a shot at it. But I had some friends and others approach me and urge me, and I had a real sense of calling. And so after a time of prayer and counsel from some folks whom I knew would be straight with me and slap me around if it were necessary, I decided to proceed. I was nominated by Howie Donahoe, who was the last ruling elder moderator, and to whom I had lost the election for moderator in 2020, I believe it was. But Howie is a good friend. We've served together for some time on the SJC, and I said afterwards, after the election, I wasn't sure that I recognized the person whom he nominated based on the things that he had to say. But Howie's a kind brother and was kind, and so yes, going in, those who are going to be nominated typically are aware, and hopefully have also done some preparation. Looking over the overtures, familiarizing themselves with that. And their conversations with staff folks and others about things that may come up. The moderator is in one sense, yes, very definitely the presiding officer, but there are a host of people up there that are making the job easier and helping the moderator to accomplish what's necessary to move the meeting along.
Yes. I assume you've moderated your presbytery at times. Would that be accurate?
I have. So that was helpful experience too.
Right. So I don't know. I think I've heard that may have never happened before, where a previous moderator nominated who they had been run against in the past as the nomination. Have you heard anything about that? Or
no, I have not.
Yeah,
hadn't thought about it, but
it's pretty neat.
It was well, and frankly, there's a very collegial attitude. I mean, Mel Duncan was the other nominee, and I've got great respect for Mel. Count him a friend. He's a colleague on the SJC, and similarly, prior to the 2020 assembly, when Howie and I were the 2 nominees, he and I collaborated in our preparations, and after the assembly, we spent time together at a lake house. So, good friends, and trying to work together to help the assembly to get its business done and to serve the church.
Oh, that's really encouraging to hear, actually. And I know a lot of men were conflicted on who to vote for, yourself or Mel, because they love and respect both of you. So that's a great sort of testimony to.
Mel is certainly a fine man, loves the church, and is very capable.
Yes. So it is surprising to me to hear that. I mean, I get it. You'll be nominated and voted, or a man is nominated and voted at the assembly. But that assembly book, I wish I had one printed out, is like that thick. And when I've moderated presbytery meetings, because I was the moderator in South Florida in 2018, and I've moderated here where I am now, it's like you need to go in prepared. It's a ship and it's sailing, and you got so how much preparation do you do, and is there any point in that, and especially you've had to do it 3 times, like is there any point in that you ask yourself, is it worth it, knowing that you may or may not actually get the post?
There were occasions when I wondered whether I had lost my mind and whether I was wasting my time. But it's always good to go to the assembly prepared and to know what's coming up. There are folks who go with no preparation, but I think after men go once or twice, they typically will try to prepare, know better what the issues are, and in that sense, preparing to moderate is really, I don't want to say it's not much more than one would do to just be a commissioner, but it is good preparation to simply be a commissioner if you prepare as if you were going to moderate the meeting. And you also are supplemented by the fact that you may have meetings with the stated clerk, who is certainly very familiar with the docket, and others who also assist in preparation. I'll chuckle with you and confess. You talked about the thickness of the notebook, and I foolishly went to this assembly believing that I could work off of my iPad. And I had not been at the podium for more than about 5 minutes before I realized what a terrible assumption that was. And so at the close of the evening, Tuesday evening, I confessed my error and asked if I might get a hard copy. And so I had a hard copy first thing the next morning, and I had folks who were diligently trying to be sure that I was prepared by handing me items, as they came up. So that too was helpful.
Wow. Well, it all was very smooth from our perspective, what was going on up there. But I can imagine, I mean, as I prepare for General Assembly, and I think what you said is right. Like I've only been to 2, and the first one I didn't go very prepared. I had a list of the overtures and then print it out, but that was it. And just watching the dynamics of everything that's happening, I realized I need to come in much more prepared the next year. Actually, because I want it to be. I've been a moderator of a presbytery, and my background's engineering and business, so I like that anyway. But as I prepare for the assembly, like I'm not giving much thought to the various reports of other denominations, the various reports of the agencies, in other words, we're looking at what decisions are we going to have to make. But as moderator, you have to know all of it. Like you have to know every little sort of intermission, every little aspect of it. And so,
thankfully, there's a big and well-oiled machine that helps in the process. You've got the folks that are on the podium, and they are very helpful. Although at times, you're trying to listen and be attentive to what's going on ahead of you, while at the same time you're hearing folks to either side of you that are conferring and working to help you, but and are very helpful. But and then of course you've got everybody, to the employees of the various committees and agencies who have done a lot of work to prepare. You've got the floor clerks. You've got Larry Roth on the organ. Someone gave me the advice that if things get rocky, or if you get stalled at some point, it's never a bad thing to sing a hymn.
And you got us to do that a couple times. It was, but really very, very smooth. Honestly, very smoothly. Like it was sort of, okay, he took care of that. Yeah, there's some confusion. There's some and then we're praising God, and it was like, okay, it's okay.
Yeah, so what if the clickers don't work? We can still sing.
Yes, yeah, no, that was good. So you've referenced a few times the different people up there with you, and if anybody, I wish I had thought to have pictures because I could share stuff, but there's an army of people up there. You're at the podium, but there's tables to your right and left, and I think even people behind you, and there's people moving about. And so who else is up there with you, and what are their roles? And it doesn't have to be comprehensive. Just give us a sense of who else is up there.
Well, generally, immediately to the moderator's right is Brian Chappell, the stated clerk, and then as you proceed on outward there, and Brian serves, the stated clerk serves as the parliamentarian of the assembly, but he has assistant parliamentarians, and so there were 3 of those last year. And then you have secretaries, one of whom was on the far right, one of whom was on the far left. There are individuals who are timekeepers. Per Almquist was immediately to my left, and one of the things that he did, which was very helpful, as you might imagine, when you're up there and people are going to microphones, you're trying to keep the order proper, you're trying to be sure that you alternate and the like. So, I had a sheet that I was marking on, and he also had one, and it was very helpful because at times I might miss someone, and so I was able to, look over and compare with him. But, you got to keep up with the length of time that is spent on a particular topic, the length of time for a person, an individual speaker, and the like. And so thankfully there are other folks who monitor that activity, and in one sense, the moderator is up there like the marionette who's someone else has got the strings working to make the moderator look like they're in control. That may not be the case always.
Yes, and so you just hit on something else I wanted to ask you about, which was how did you keep straight? Because what would you say is there like a dozen microphones there? But also it looked like it would be difficult to see from the stage through the lights across over 2,000 people. How were you able to do that?
Well, you're exactly right, and particularly Tuesday evening there was difficulty. I don't know what was done, but Tuesday evening it was both difficult to see well, but also to hear. And so particularly when there's a discussion going on that may have some energy to it, you want to be focused on it. You want to understand what's happening and to be able to respond, particularly if someone, strays and begins to head down a path that's, not productive for the assembly and would be out of order. But, thankfully, as I said, there are people up there who are helping to keep up with the sequence, and you just have to, really try to be focused. And, on occasion, I think that I was corrected by folks, but, thankfully, Per was very good in terms of, being sure that I stayed on task, and I tried to be attuned for the very reason you're talking about. I wanted to be sure that I didn't miss someone, skip someone, and my attitude is always that you want to give people the opportunity to speak, but you also don't want people to jump up and repeat what's already been said. So to that degree, the person that's first to the microphone really should get the opportunity to first speak on a topic or to make particular points on that topic. Excuse me.
Yeah, bless you. So when you said you don't want repetitious sort of speeches, like my session has a joke. Let me think if I can. Everything's been said, but not everybody's said it yet.
Roy Taylor used to make that point at every first-time commissioner orientation.
Okay. Yeah, so maybe they got it from him. So how do you? I don't remember that ever coming up. But what would you do in that case if there is repetition or you're getting too Yeah, I mean, what do you do when people are just, if they're not intemperate, is there anything you do as moderator in that case?
Well, I don't recall having to do this at the assembly last year, but in other instances when I have moderated, I've tried to gently suggest to the body, and I think I did make this as a general comment to the assembly, that to remember that effectively every time you go to the microphone, you're taking up the time of every individual commissioner and of the body as a whole. So be attuned to that. Be considerate as to the fact that there's a lot of business to be done, and you may have something that's significant that needs to be said, but if it's already been said, for goodness sakes, let the body move on. And you want to do that in a way that's respectful, because the job of the moderator is not to be an enforcer. It's to assist the body and to enable people to fully vet a topic as necessary to reach a decision, but to do so in a manner that's considerate to the body. Everyone that's in that room is an ordained elder commissioner. Everyone that's there has an equal vote, and everyone that's there should similarly have an equal right to the microphone. So it's, to me, that's a real responsibility of the moderator, is to be courteous to the members and to facilitate their engagement, but to do so in a way that's also respectful of the body as a whole.
So how is calling the question viewed in that context? I mean, sometimes it's helpful and makes sense. Other times it seems maybe it was premature. How do you view that as the moderator?
Well, as the moderator, in one sense, there were times when I was appreciative of the fact that the question would be called, simply because to my ear and my sensibilities, it seemed that a topic had been thoroughly discussed. But thankfully, that's a decision for the body, not for the moderator, and so the body can express itself with regard to whether or not it wants to proceed further. And to me, that's one of the beauties of parliamentary procedure, that the body retains the right to extend debate and therefore has control over those things.
Yes. So, okay, are you still the moderator of the Presbyterian Church in America, or does it end as the assembly ends?
I'm still the moderator. I'm the moderator until my successor is elected. And so, yes, I am.
Okay. So who's your successor?
I've heard two names of individuals that I understand will be nominated. Each of them fine men, and it will be a wonderful assembly.
Okay. Maybe you'll tell me after we hit stop on the recording. You give me some insider news there. What was before we move on to this year's assembly? Was there anything that surprised you about being moderator? What were some memorable moments for you? What was the experience like?
Well, the experience was, to me it was wonderful. As we were going to worship, I remember telling my wife, who had, with me, had thought that after two attempts maybe I should sit down, and she I think was being protective of me. Said, I don't want your feelings to be hurt. I don't want you to, that kind of thing. And as we were walking to worship, I remember saying to her, I feel good about this, but it's the Lord's church, and if I lose, I lose. But when the vote was announced, in one sense, it was suddenly, gee, I need to get up there and start doing business.
Yes.
And so I wasn't startled by it, but there was a realization that I had to immediately, get in gear, if you will. Mm-hmm. And pick up my bag and get up there and pull out my trusty iPad, which, as good as it is, I couldn't flip through it as fast as I needed to in that setting.
Yes. Yes. Oh, I can imagine. Yeah, one minute you're sitting in the crowd, the next minute you're directing things. So
well, and two, it was very humbling. Both Mel Duncan and his nominator Harry Reeder, are fine men. I have great respect for them, but to go to that podium and to have been elected was just a very humbling honor. There are very capable men in that room, and so it was a deep honor, and is.
Yeah, well, I'm really glad you said that, because more than an honor, would you say there's a weight to it, a weightiness?
There is, to me, and I go back to the function of the moderator. I felt there to be a responsibility to assist the body, to do its work, to do it in an orderly manner, and to do so in that orderliness without having the emotion that surrounded certain topics derail us. So I was trying to be very careful to give people enough latitude to say the things that they needed to say without allowing the emotion to boil over in a manner that would not be productive and would be counterproductive.
Right.
And I felt a real responsibility in that vein. We've had some topics that have been on our docket the last couple of years that have been ones about which there's strong feelings, and that's okay. But we just need to work through them in a manner that recognizes the fact that we're brothers in Christ. We're representing Him, and so we need to conduct ourselves accordingly and to respect one another.
Yes, yeah, and that just, even through this conversation, it's occurred to me, like, again, that idea that 1 second you're sitting in the crowd, coming as a commissioner with your own ideas of how you're going to vote and your own research on the things we're going to be discussing, your own strong feelings, and then the next minute you're completely a neutral person up there. Right. So that, yeah, and with no real time to prepare that. Again, like when I moderated at Presbytery, so you go in knowing, okay, I got to be, I can't be partisan on this. I have to be neutral, and there's for me there was mental preparation on those things, because I can be passionate about an issue.
Well, and in candor, the other thing that I appreciated is that frankly the assembly was kind to me and was forgiving of me. My memory has blotted out the particulars, but there were a couple of times when I made missteps, and the assembly was forgiving of me, and I appreciated that.
Yeah, well, that's great. Yeah. When I mentioned the weightiness of it, I often think, this was my impression of the first General Assembly that I was at. It's like you read about the assembly of the church in the Jerusalem Council in the book of Acts, and the church coming together to deliberate the issues, and to the best of our ability, through prayer and seeking the Holy Spirit's guidance and direction and the Word of God, making decisions for the church. There's a weight there, and so I just can imagine that's just amplified in the role of moderator or anybody up at the front.
Well, and I'm sure that you have had the same experience that I have of people in your congregation asking you about things both beforehand and after, and others within the presbytery and so on. So yeah, there is a weighty responsibility, not only within the body of the assembly itself, but within the broader church. Yeah,
I love, so I generally keep the congregation here informed on, what the issues are. I always do a recap after the General Assembly, and I write something. And I've just been encouraged that I'm in a church where the congregants care about the broader church, and they've come to expect that from me. And so, that's an encouragement.
Kudos to you. Yeah.
Well, thanks for that. Yeah. And so that let's encourage whoever's listening to this, ruling elders and teaching elders alike, like your congregation, believe it or not, I believe, even if they don't know it, as soon as they start hearing about what you're going to do, they will care, because they care about Christ Church. And there is a sense that we're just representing them anyway.
Yeah.
And so, I view it as an honor to vote on the church's behalf and to keep us all informed. Yeah. So so as you said, you're moderator until this next assembly. Does that actually entail anything between summers? Are you being conferred with on anything, or is it just an honorary?
Yeah. Well, informally, I've had, various people, some who were at the assembly, others who weren't. But I've had people who have contacted me with follow-up questions. What about this? What about that? How did this happen? And both looking retrospectively at last year, but also looking prospectively at things that are coming up. But in terms of official responsibilities, there are a few. The sitting moderator, as well as the 5 immediate past moderators, are unofficial members or observers, if you will, at the meeting of the Cooperative Ministries Committee. Cooperative Ministries Committee consists of the coordinators and the chairs of the permanent committees for all the committees and agencies of the denomination, and that committee meets annually, or if it may meet more often than annually if necessary, but I think typically it meets annually. And somewhat like the assembly, the sitting moderator attends his first meeting as an observer, but moderates the meeting. So that's kind of an odd situation, to go to a meeting that you never attended and moderate it. But but the goal of that CMC is to be sure that the committees and agencies are working in concert with one another to achieve the goals of the assembly, and to do so in a manner that's rational and makes sense in terms of our use of resources. And so I was at that meeting in January. Interesting to hear the way that the committees and agencies are working together. And even as we met, there was conversation, across the room and in the table about items that were going on within one committee or agency that could be augmented or assisted by others. And so, that was a fruitful situation. The sitting moderator also appoints the conveners for the various committees of commissioners. So that was a responsibility that I had. And so a few weeks ago, Brian Chappell happened to be in town here to participate in a dinner among the teaching elders of our presbytery and to encourage them. And we sat down and went over the then partial rosters for the committees of commissioners, and he and I conferred and made some selections with regard to who will convene those committees. So there again, I certainly didn't know every name, but I tried to select individuals whom I knew to be capable with respect to conducting the business.
So those committees of commissioners, do you select from people who are on that committee of commissioners, or they come from outside the? You do.
It comes from people who are on that committee of commissioners.
Okay.
And some of them I knew, not all of them. In some instances, in almost every instance, the head of the permanent committee had given some indication of people that they knew had particular knowledge with respect to their committee. And so that might be helpful in terms of chairing a committee of commissioners. But yes, it's always from a member of the committee.
So does that member, once he becomes a convener, which, and obviously correct me wherever I say something incorrectly, but he essentially moderates that meeting, right, or, of that committee of commissioners?
The convener calls the meeting to order and oversees the election of a chairman. And probably more often than not, the convener becomes the chair.
Right. Okay.
But not always. So,
okay. And does he lose his vote at that point?
You've got me.
Aha. Maybe he can break the tie or create a tie. Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. So is that published and public knowledge yet? Who the conveners are yet?
I don't believe that it is officially. You know, I've had a couple of inquiries. It will be published. I believe that it's published in the Committee of Commissioners handbooks.
Mm-hmm.
I do know with certainty, though, that when the pre-assembly materials go out to each commissioner to committees of commissioners, that roster indicates the name of the convener.
Okay.
So
and we should be getting that soon, right? I mean, it's only a month away now.
It should be very soon, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Can you explain in short form what a committee of commissioners is for somebody who hasn't been to General Assembly yet?
Yeah. A committee of commissioners' function is to review the work of the permanent committees and then to report to the Assembly on its review. So all of the various permanent committees and agencies do their work. They prepare for the Assembly. There's certain things that they want to have done. And the Committee of Commissioners reviews their minutes, their activities for the prior year. They review the things that the committee wants to bring to the floor and do so. So it is a short-term assignment on that committee, in that it only has the duration of the time of the Assembly being in session. So committees of commissioners meet on either Monday and or Tuesday leading up, and then they present their recommendations to the Assembly on the floor.
Okay, so can the Committee of Commissioners, again, my language might be off, but overrule something the permanent committee has done or is recommending?
The Committee of Commissioners can make a different recommendation to the floor of the Assembly than what is being requested or advocated by the permanent committee. Okay. If the Committee of Commissioners is concerned by something, they may also bring that to the attention of the Assembly. Hopefully, however, what happens is that if there's something that is of question, the committee always has permanent committee staff available, and those questions can generally be resolved at that point, so that there's not a dispute that arises within the conduct of the Committee of Commissioners that then migrates onto the floor.
Okay. And so the permanent committees are working year-round. Is that correct?
That's right. Correct.
Okay, so the permanent committees work year-round, and then they're going to bring their work to the Assembly, and presbyteries then appoint commissioners to be on the Committee of Commissioners to review the permanent committee's work, and that's part of this checks and balances that we have. And I've had Dr. O. Palmer Robertson on before, and he's talked a great deal about how important that whole process was. So you don't have people, for lack of a better way to phrase it, working behind the scenes year-round and the Assembly not having a check over that.
That's correct.
Okay. And so, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, let me put in a plug here. I always encourage folks to get involved and serve on a committee of commissioners. People say, why would you want to do that? It seems that that's just not particularly important work. It seems like it's not fun. And I say, you know what? In one sense, it's the scut work of the church. But it's work that needs to be done. It needs to be done well. And part of the fun of it is that you end out being thrown with a group of folks that most of whom you've probably never met. You make acquaintances. You have lunch together. You do your work, and over time those acquaintances blossom into friendships. And I can't tell you how many times I've encountered something in our local church that was new to us, and I was able to reach out to someone whom I had met through the assembly and say, we've got something that we've never encountered before. Have you had any experience with this, or can you point me in the direction where I might get some assistance? So it's, in one sense, it's selfish with respect to receiving benefit. In another sense, though, it is very necessary to the conduct of the business of the assembly for those committees to work well.
Oh, that's a great exhortation. Yeah, the first General Assembly I went to, I wasn't on a committee of commissioners, and last year I was, and it's a great experience. I was going to say empowering, but it's just so. To give people an example, like you actually have, again, there's a weightiness to it, but an example of how the Committee of Commissioners can come up with a different suggestion or recommendation to the Assembly would be last year, and this one just comes to mind, so not speaking to the whether it was a great thing or not a great thing, but the Interchurch Relations Committee was recommending to stay in the National Association of Evangelicals, but the Committee of Commissioners made the recommendation to withdraw from that organization, and that's the recommendation that carried the Assembly, or the Assembly carried the recommendation, and the point is that came from the Committee of Commissioners, not from the Permanent Committee. So
correct.
Yeah, good stuff. It can be daunting to be at the assembly and just to see, like, it is a well-oiled machine. It moves, and sometimes it's difficult to keep track of what's going on. Sometimes a yes vote is actually a no vote on the the main motion, and so you really got to keep track of what you're voting on. And so, in other words, if the Overtures Committee, and boy, I'm going to mix this up, but if the Overtures Committee is recommending no on an overture, your yes vote is a no vote on the overture. Is that right?
Well, typically, if that's occurring, the Overtures Committee is going to recommend answering Overture X in the negative.
That's okay, yes.
And so, yes, you're exactly right. Both those on the floor and those on the podium need to be sure as to the impact of a vote. Is yes affirming, or is yes affirming a recommendation to deny? and so you just have to be attentive to those things.
Right. And so sometimes I'm helping. I mean, I love this stuff. And so sometimes people say, what is, I just say, well, if you want the overture, vote this way, because it's complicated to say yes. Voting yes actually means a negative on the overture in this case. And then there's other times, of course, where you're voting on, whether to call the question or whether to challenge the chair. And so you're not actually voting on, for the motion you've been discussing, you're voting on something else. And so you definitely got to be paying attention. That's for sure. And I can imagine from your perspective, trying to keep it all straight. That's a challenge too.
Yeah, I think there may have been a time last year when I had to say stop. Let's go back and be sure that we all know what we're doing here. That a vote yay on this measure means this, and I think that's always something that it's helpful to be sure that everyone is informed on, because if you're not paying attention, sometimes it can be easy to vote thinking you're voting for one thing, but the effect of your vote is diametrically opposed to your intention.
Right.
Not a good thing.
No, that's right. Right. So let's say somebody from the floor is confused, and they can't just get it quickly resolved by asking the person next to them, because there's probably a lot of people confused. What's the right mechanism? Was the right mechanism to ask for point of order and ask, what does a yes vote on this mean? Or is that like taking the assembly's time unnecessarily?
No, that is absolutely in order, particularly, and frankly, it's something that the moderator tries to be attuned to. If there's a sense of confusion on the floor, that kind of clarification is worthwhile. And very, very necessary to the good of the body. I mean, as you can imagine, let's hypothetically say that there were an issue that had great significance and about which there was a lot of emotion, to rush through and have people uncertain as to whether their vote achieved the intent that they wanted, particularly if their desired outcome is not the result of the vote, is frustrating, both for the individual, but it's also very counterproductive for the body.
Yes. So going into this assembly, what are some things that are going to happen? Walk people through some things that will happen, maybe even from your perspective as the outgoing moderator, and there'll be a new moderator.
Well, again, I encourage folks to come early. If you're on a committee of commissioners, great. If you're not presently and are watching this, contact your presbytery stated clerk. If your presbytery doesn't have an appointee commissioner to a committee of commissioners, then if you get the appropriate approvals, and I know that our presbytery, like many others, empowers the moderator and the stated clerk to make appointments, and so you can virtually walk in to a committee of commissioners and join that committee. The work of the committee of commissioners is not always terribly entertaining, although there's typically a fair number of people who want to observe the overtures committee just because of the function of that committee. But so Monday and Tuesday, you've got committee of commissioners work. Early afternoon Tuesday, the exhibit hall opens and there's a reception there. The exhibit hall is going to be loaded with good information, useful stuff for ministry and the like. There will be seminars that can be very informative and helpful. And then, the assembly convenes on Tuesday evening with what to me is just a magnificent worship service, and the celebration of the Lord's Supper. The opening worship service will be preached by Randy Thompson, a lion of our presbytery, who I know will do a fine job. And for people that have not attended an assembly, I find the worship services magnificent, and I find the hymn singing particularly stirring, because you've got full-throated participation, and it's just a great time of joy. So those are the things that happen leading up to the conduct of business, if you will. And then after the opening worship service, the outgoing moderator, in this instance I will call the meeting to order. We will establish the fact that there's a quorum. We'll go through certain mechanical items, but basically Tuesday evening by and large is spent setting up the work of the assembly for the remainder of its time in session. There may be partial reports from the overtures committee, partial report from RPR, could be I think that there have been occasions when the SJC has made partial reports, and those really come primarily because of the possibility of their impacting events that will occur downstream in the conduct of the business of the assembly. So Tuesday night is devoted to that. Wednesday morning, there will be an assembly-wide seminar gathering. I believe that.
So, John, wait a minute. When does the moderator? That happens Tuesday night, right?
That those things happen
right away.
Tuesday night.
Yeah. So
yeah, and there is also the election of the moderator Tuesday night.
Mm-hmm. And then you happily hand over the gavel. Is there a gavel? Do you have a gavel?
There is a gavel. I don't think I used it last year, so.
Oh man, use it this year, would you? Use it this year to call us to order. Oh, you're going to want to do that. Trust me.
Well, that probably will be necessary because there's so much friendly conversation going on that getting people to come to order can be a challenge.
That's right. When you're up there this summer and you feel the need to get people's attention, you remember George told me to use the hammer. You'll remember this discussion.
This one's for George.
Yes, you can even say that if you want. No, I'm kidding. So okay, and then you'll be no longer our moderator, and you will be in the crowd, I suppose.
Right.
Okay.
Wednesday night. I have one other responsibility, and that is I believe that I will deliver the report of the Cooperative Ministries Committee.
Okay.
But that's not as the moderator. That's in the function of that committee.
Yes. So let me see if I'm able to pull up the GA website.
Hey, while you're doing that, let me also commend the work of the host committees. I talked about the machine, if you will, of the denomination that's doing the work to conduct the assembly. But you've also got a local committee arising out of that presbytery and volunteers from the churches of the presbytery that really do yeoman's work. I recall, seeing friends at assemblies, who are volunteers, and they're members of local churches who are out, doing things ranging from, directing folks to handing out materials and conducting registrations. So the local churches and the local churches frequently will provide choirs and so on. So the host committee, consisting of the local presbytery and its member churches and their congregants, also contribute greatly to the conduct of the assembly.
I'm glad you mentioned that. And so for anybody listening, presbyteries kind of, I guess they apply to the administrative committee to be an option. Is that correct, John? They kind of say we'd like to host.
They do, and the administrative committee will do some survey work to determine the adequacy of facilities, meeting rooms, hotel rooms, transportation, restaurants, and the like. And they also, of course, want to consider just the ease of accessibility. So.
Right. So if you haven't been to General Assembly, last year had, I think, 2,200 people, give or take, and that's just registered commissioners. That's not even including people that just come and maybe even host committee volunteers, because as John said, the host committee, a lot of them are just, they're lay people from the churches who care about the work of the PCA and are excited to be a part of it. And they're there like answering questions and directing people where to go. I mean, there's all kinds of volunteers all over this place. You say, where do they come from? They don't all come from the administrative committee. They're coming from the local churches in that area through the host committee. And so you're absolutely right that it's a huge amount of work to find a convention and hotel space to house over 2,000 people, meeting space for, can you imagine the room that's required, and then the technology involved so that you have microphones all over and you need to be able to hear them. And those clickers, I wish they would do something about the clickers, John, but I don't know if you have any pull there.
George, for what it's worth, you said you've been to 2 assemblies. Were voting cards used at your first one?
No, I've heard about. They still give us those just in case, I guess.
Still give voting cards.
How did you do that? Explain that?
Well, one of the groups of unsung heroes of the assembly is the floor clerk organization. Rick Springer has been doing that work for years. Jim Smith used to be with him, but at any rate, floor clerks have responsibility. I did it for several years, and as I recall, typically we would have responsibility for several rows, 5, maybe 10 rows. But the floor clerks are both distributing materials, but when there's a vote, if it's a close vote, there's a count required. And so there would be hand voting, and people would raise their cards. And if the moderator could not tell the prevailing vote, people would be called upon to raise their cards or perhaps stand. And the floor clerks, each with responsibility for a designated area, would count those persons standing, write it on a tally sheet, and take it forward to one of the to Springer or one of his assistants, who would then total them up, and then the opposing vote would also be taken. So that would sometimes take several minutes.
Wow.
So
Yes,
despite the problems with the clickers, it's much better than the voting cards were.
Oh, no doubt. I don't even know what it would be like. Now, I think the assemblies have gotten bigger since those voting cards, but still, the only problem with the clickers is I don't mind. I mean, obviously, I'd rather push a button, but sometimes the votes didn't go in, But
I might not have been elected.
No, you were.
This is all a sham.
The whole thing. No, you got a good sense of humor. You were very stern up as a moderator, and so I'm glad we get to do this.
Stern?
Not stern, just focused. Focused. Not stern at all, actually. Just focused. So now, is it scrolling now on your screen?
It is.
Okay, so PCAGA.org, and it's a beautiful website. You see right there in the front, you have PCA 50 and our Mandalorian logo. No, that's the PCA logo. And you see all kinds of links here. And there's a site there to PCA50.org, which is a great resource to celebrate our history as we approach the 50th General Assembly on our 50th anniversary, which we could talk about in a sec, actually. But you can see as you scroll down these icons, or I guess they're called icons, where you could see the schedules of the assembly, the overtures. So this is all available to every single person. This is not a private website. It's all out in the public. You can see the schedules, the seminars, and the overtures. And there are, this is a lot of the work that will be voted on. It's not everything that will be voted on, but there's 27 overtures that are going mostly to Overtures Committee, but many to different committees. Some you see to the SJC. And so just trying to familiarize anybody who may be watching how to see this. The schedules, you can see there's a docket, which will be more, again, in line with like parliamentary procedure. And then there's just a schedule, which is more like it as if it were a convention, just very easy when the start-stop times are. Oh, that one's not actually showing on yours. Anyway, you get the point. But as I mentioned, the 50th anniversary, John, what are some things you're excited about as we turn 50?
George, it's really, to me, a testimony as to the Lord's faithfulness to see where we are at 50 years. I took a look back. I want to say that at the first assembly, there were 300 odd. Let me look this up. 387 commissioners at the first assembly. There will probably be 2,300 this year. We've grown. We've got churches scattered throughout the country. We've got missionaries scattered around the world who are not only doing the work of evangelism, but working to build local churches in those international locales. We've got the ministry of RUF on last year, I believe they reported 176 campuses, but also now working with international students specifically, and now beginning to plant on international campuses. So, the church has grown and thrived, and we continue to proclaim the message of Christ. That Jesus Christ came to save sinners. And,
Amen.
It is exciting to me to think about what the Lord is doing through our denomination. It's cause for celebration. Yes, when we gather for the assembly, there are topics that come up that have great emotion attached to them. But, the good thing about that is that those emotions arise from the fact that we're committed to Scripture. We're committed to proclaiming Christ. Sometimes it can be easy to forget that those with whom we differ in terms of pathway are still pursuing the same end that I am. They just see a different pathway to get there, and they're brothers in Christ, and all too often in the hurly-burly, if you will, of working through and grinding to reach decisions, it can be easy to forget the fact that we're brothers in Christ. And, it's so my hope is that this will be both a celebration of that, a celebration of the unity that we have in Christ, and that we will demonstrate both to the city of Memphis and to those who watch us, but that our work will be representative of Christ and His kingdom, and that will also be our work, the remainder of the year, that we would indeed season our environments, our communities, our workplaces, with, the sweet fragrance of Christ, and bring people to Him, that they would know Him for salvation.
Preach, John. Do you get to preach at your church, brother? I preach.
No.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. That is why we exist. That is why we do what we do. Praise God. I'm so encouraged by what you just shared. Yes, 50 years. It is an amazing testimony to what God's doing here, and yet a blip in church history. And so may He continue His church, and may the PCA be in His favor, and may He be pleased to continue to keep our lampstand lit for His glory and for salvation. I love it. We've gone. We're probably getting close, Mr. Moderator. I'm not ready to call the question yet, but see, I had added like one little kind of pun there or whatever. But I know you thought about being on this interview. So was there anything else you wanted to share with whoever may be listening as we get ready to sign off?
I would encourage people to come to the assembly. I will tell a story on myself.
Yes.
You might get a chuckle out of this. I laugh and tell people, encouraging folks to go, and they say, I've never done that before. My consulting work, I, from time to time, would tell people I haven't done exactly this, but I've done other things close to it, but I've never done anything that I didn't once do the first time. But I recall being at an assembly some years ago. I was on a committee of commissioners. The moderator called for the report of that committee, and the chairman was off of the floor. So he went on, took a report from another committee, called for the committee that I was on a second time. Chairman was not present. When the third time came around, he asked if there was anyone from the committee who could come forward and make the report. There was no movement. The moderator said, is there no one in the room that was in that committee? And I sheepishly held my hand up and went to the podium, on the way receiving, as I passed John Robertson, a copy of the report. And as I began making the report, this was for the M&A committee, and it involved the division of some presbyteries. And from the floor, people rose with regard to two presbytery divisions to protest and to say that they were not properly conducted at the Presbyterian level. And I can assure you that at that moment, I felt that I was standing at the podium with my shorts around my knees.
I bet.
That may not be appropriate for inclusion in this, but...
No, we'll leave it in. So, what happened? Where was the convener or the?
Well, there had been
the chairman.
One item that had been contested. It had been resolved off the floor, but thankfully, I'm pretty certain that it was Kennedy Smart who got the attention of the moderator and basically said that one of those protesting was mistaken. And the moderator said, well, we still have this item on the floor. And he said, if you'll take care of us from a parliamentary perspective, I'll take care of Bob and his concern. And we moved onward, much to my relief.
Okay. What year was this? Do you remember?
I think it was 2006.
Okay. All right. And who would
in Atlanta, and I remember that Dominic Aquila was the moderator.
Oh, very good. Okay.
But
I wonder if he remembers that.
Well, he probably doesn't, but it was memorable for me. And the poor guy that was the chair of the committee was actually off of the floor. I think he was trying to get additional copies of the report or something of that sort. He was not being derelict, but he just wasn't available in the committee. I mean, the assembly needed to move on.
Oh, that's funny. And who would guess that 15 or 17 years later you'd be the moderator? So sheepishly one day and 17 years later ready to lead us.
Sheepishly again.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, good word, John. I appreciate that. So for anybody listening, there's this great booklet, Parliamentary Procedure for Presbyters, written by Pastor Jacob Gerber. And it's put out by the Gospel Reformation Network, and it was given out at their conference last week, but it will also be available at the Gospel Reformation Network luncheon. So another thing that happens at the General Assembly is a number of different groups have luncheons. I think MNA has one, MTW has one, the seminaries have them. The Gospel Reformation Network has one. 500 seats have sold out, and they got bigger space. So they have another 150 tickets, and you could just go to gospelreformation.net and click register for luncheon and join the luncheon. I believe it's Wednesday afternoon. But just wanted to give that plug also. And John, you're a gentleman, you're a churchman. We haven't met in person, but I look forward to shaking your hand as moderator. And maybe if you don't use the gavel, you'll let me bang it a few times before the thing starts. What do you think?
I'm not sure that they're going to trust me with the gavel. George, I look forward to meeting you face to face, and thank you for your graciousness with this and for the opportunity. I say to folks in the church, come to the assembly, and even if you're not a commissioner, you can be blessed. And I think seeing the work of the church at work through its representatives, to me, is very encouraging. And so I urge people to go, particularly if you're in the Memphis area.
That's great input, especially the worship. Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I'm glad you shared that, because there's a lot of PCA presence in that area. So good encouragement. John, what do you say when you close the assembly? What do you say?
I believe we say we're adjourned, and also there is a statement as to reconvening June the whatever it is in Memphis, Tennessee. Okay.
Well, there you go. So I will say it. We are adjourned on this call, and we will reconvene whenever I get another guest. I will say this. People were joking. They say, how does George get to talk to some of the coolest people? Because I've had Dr. O. Palmer Robertson on. I've had Mel Duncan on. I've had a number of cool people. I said, well, I had to start a podcast for people to want to talk to me. and then they were willing to. And so I do appreciate, I mean, we turned this interview around super quick. And so thank you again, John.
Hey, thank you for doing this. Thank you for serving the church with this. And nice to meet you through this medium and perhaps through another, face-to-face.
Yes.
Take care, friend.
See you in Memphis. You too.